basically, Prisma is a GraphQL wrapper around your database. It's open source, so you can just install it and own and run it and whatever. But there's also a SaaS offering. They need to make some money, so they also have like a cloud solution that you can use, which actually we'll do also in this talk. I will show you how that works. And it was called GraphQL before, and I think it's good to change the name. And this is sort of like what Prisma is. So you have your databases, probably just one database. Maybe it's Postgres or MySQL. They put MongoDB in this picture for marketing reasons. They don't actually support it yet, I think, maybe in beta or something, but it's mostly around MySQL and Postgres. And those databases can be anywhere. Like you can have them running locally, you can have them in a Docker instance, you can have them on the cloud, you can also use their databases hosted in the SaaS offering in Prisma Cloud, which is what I will do and which I want to do because I don't want to be in the business of hosting databases. But anyway, then you use GraphQL to query and mutate the data, but also to define the structure of the database. So you don't have to go into the database, create tables, and define what the columns do. That's all done in GraphQL. And basically, I think the Prisma is a piece of, it's a process, right? It's running somewhere. So it's written in Node.js, you can host it with Docker, and then you can, it has to run somewhere. So it needs a server. So I'm just gonna like show you like a simple hello world. So let me see. Yeah, okay. So I'm gonna kill this REST endpoint. And yep, that one. So, basically you have this like command line tool called Prisma. And then you can just do an init. And I will call mine hello world. Obligatory hello world. And then when you do that, it basically like you get this like setup sort of wizard that you go through. I really like nowadays that you can have this in CLI and everything. Well, you can connect to an existing database or what I just said, and you can also connect to a demo server, which I will do here. And then you can choose, do you want it in the EU or in the US? Well, we want in the EU, the name. You can have different stages, like we'll just do dev, but you can also have other stages. So you can have multiple stages. So now it's created this thing. Ignore these warnings. Yesterday when I did this, the whole thing didn't work anymore. They had some bug, but now they have 0.1, so it's probably fixed, but I'm not gonna do it. So basically it's created this folder for me, hello world. And if I would go to my editor, you see here hello world. So, and in here is a data model, and they just by default give you a user. But you see it's pretty straightforward, right? You recognize this by now. It's type user and it has an ID. This means it's just like a non-human readable string, and this is like a directive, the same as we saw earlier with deprecated. This just tells Prisma that IDs are never duplicates, so it's just a unique field. And you have this the name field, which is a string, which is always present.
Is this unique? Is that from Prisma, or is that something that is built in?
I don't know exactly if that's in the GraphQL spec, but you are as able, like GraphQL gives you the ability to define directives, and that's what at least is used in Prisma. And then you get this other file, which is like a configuration file for Prisma, and it defines this endpoint, and it says what the data model is used. So I can actually go to this endpoint here, and then it opens in this one. Oh, sorry, I just have to. It's actually pretty hard with all these screens. I never do it this way. You know what? I'm actually gonna switch to monitoring so I don't go crazy. What do you call it? Mirroring. Yep. Okay, cool. So now I opened this this link here, and I've already here been here before. So that's what you saw earlier. But I can now query, like this is like what you saw earlier. This is it's just the graphical like interface, and here you see all of the types of queries I could do. And these are like mutations. I didn't like focus on them earlier, but when you create a type, for example, a user, then Prisma, based on OpenCRUD, which is the standard, defines like which CRUD kind of mutations and how you like which update, delete, and create mutations there are, and which how you can read them. And for example, you can just query for users like I did here, and then it just works like it always does. You can then query for ID and name because those are the only two I specified. But I don't have any users yet. If I would go here again and then I would change my data model, and I would say like foo, I just add this property, and then I can do Prisma deploy, and that basically syncs up this type definition that I have, and it syncs it up to my Prisma service. And that service now is running in the cloud, but that could just be running locally as well, or wherever you want it. So when I go here now and I reload this page, and then I go to user, you see that now I have this foo type here as well. So that's pretty straightforward. So like that's like how you sort of like, by changing the types, you change the underlying database shape. And I actually didn't prepare that part of this. I think I should, but I actually have no idea what the database looks like. So, but probably it's like optimized for being able to query it with GraphQL. I sure hope so, at least. Anyway, that's like, so I don't know the exact shape of this database because it's not accessible for me. So I can only access it through GraphQL. So, but if I want to, for example, add a user, then I can do like a mutation. You haven't seen those before, but you basically say I want a mutation. Create user is one of the mutations available, and then you basically provide the data you need. So, and then a mutation has always a return type. So if I would go here to, I actually have mirroring. So if I go to create user here and I click on that, you see that it returns a user always, unless it fails, but that would be an error. So, but if it's successful, you always get a user back. And so I can then query it here. I can like also ask for foo, which will be empty, of course, if I don't actually create something with it. So now I've created this user here, and I can do it again. And then when I go here and I query for all the users by ID, you see that they're there, and you see that the names are like there. So this is like pretty much like how you interact now with your database. You just can like create, read, update. You can do all those things. They also have this kind of like nifty tool called Prisma Console, which basically is like this like more the cloud management tool. And then you just see like the data you have here, and you have like your deployment history. This is kind of long because I've been working earlier on this Hello World example. You have some metrics, which is kind of handy in like production environment. You can see response times and data usage and all those things. And a data browser, so you can actually see, if I would have more types, this would be just a longer list here. Yeah. Yeah, so that's basically that's Prisma. So it's a GraphQL wrapper around your database. Does anybody have like a question already? Okay.
It says there on the picture that can you connect multiple databases?
No, I don't think so. But you oh shit. Yeah, no, you have one Prisma instance per database. There might be like maybe as a like a scaling strategy, there's actually multiple database behind it, but that's more like as in like, you know, scaling issue. It's not like But it's really easy, of course, to have. You can also have multiple GraphQL endpoints that you merge together and then interact with. So it doesn't have to be. You can have multiple Prisma instances. You're not limited to one or something.
Have you run GraphQL schema over multiple Prisma instances?
Yeah, that's the next step. So, um, any other questions? So, of course, this is just like a GraphQL layer around your database. You're not going to expose this to your end users, right? It's not like you're just going to do this Bobby tables kind of thing where it's just like, oh, your end user can define what's in my database. You actually want to control it. You don't want them to see all the users and the email addresses and whatever you have stored there. So you need something in the middle. So that's you still need a server. You cannot escape it. Like it's not like you have now just because you wrapped your database in some sort of open CRUD kind of GraphQL implementation that you don't need a backend anymore. You still need a backend. But you likely want to interact with that backend. Like if your client is on the bottom left, and this is where Prisma is, then you likely want to interact with your server also with GraphQL. It's not right. So you have a GraphQL server connected to a GraphQL server. And that's kind of like like a mindfuck. It's like, oh, I have to like pass through queries. How do I do that? Like, and actually they made that pretty sweet. Like they made that really easy, and that's where Prisma bindings come in. If you actually, I have a link to the presentation later, and then you can click on it if you're interested. But that makes it actually pretty easy. And I just want to go through like a slightly more complicated example where I take the GraphQL implementation we had in the first presentation, and I now actually build it in Prisma. And I've already done some work for it. So I have this folder here called Server Prisma, and there's also, just like in the Hello World, there's this data model and Prisma file. So the data model, I just took the schema that I before had in my GraphQL server, and I just copy pasted it here. There's some slight changes, but you can trust me, it's largely the same. So that's the easy part. Now we've defined our data model, so I can now go to this. I can do Prisma deploy in this for this type for this Prisma server, and it will actually start like sending these types to the Prisma instance, and it will organize my database according to those types. So that's actually really simple. If you have a GraphQL schema, it takes like one command to spin up a Prisma server and all the database behind it inside the Prisma cloud. I thought that was pretty sweet that it took so little effort.
You change the schema like
Yeah.
running.
Yeah, so if I would change here foo string, and I would run it again, then you see that it created the type field foo, and I can also remove it again. Sorry. Yeah, so you have some like control, for example, you by defining like a unique index, or you can have when you, for example, delete, you can have like these deletion strategies, and I think I'm not entirely sure if that's also done with indexes. I honestly like don't know. I know there's like the point of it is that you sort of you don't have to think about those things. You define how your data looks. You define like how it should behave, but you don't have to go through go to that implementation detail of making sure that you also have a database that's performant and can deliver you that data in a way that you're happy with. That is the job of Prisma. So like you basically you give up part of your responsibility, and probably that's not always going to cut it. Like, but likely in the beginning when you're starting something new, up to a certain scale. Like when you run into the issue that this is not performant anymore, then you probably did a really good job because you managed to sort of not bother about a whole part of your stack until the moment that you really have proven that you need to bother about those kind of things. So unless it's really sucky technology, right, that it actually doesn't even scale to like 2 users or anything, but let's assume that it scales pretty well. And because you can choose your own database and you can choose where it's running, you can choose Amazon and you can have this mega performant database. So you can always like just throw dollar bills at it in order to compensate for the fact that this might be not as performant as you would want it to. But I honestly think that this is made sort of to be performant. So it would really surprise me if they would have baked something that you, if you get to be worried about index and all those kind of things, then either you have large scale or this solution is not living up to its core value proposition, is that you don't have to bother about those things anymore. So I think that's sort of like the knife edge. Does it fall on which side it falls? Sorry. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think like the value proposition they sort of give is that you don't have to bother about that, and that they will do that for you. And I cannot go into like I can only say relay what they say. Like I just haven't tried it enough. This stuff is pretty new in that way, so like I don't know enough about it to really like back that up. But that is sort of their bread and butter. Like that's the value proposition of Prisma, is that you don't have to worry about that anymore, and that you can just define in your schema where that you want this to be unique, and you want those things to be um, you want the whole thing to be performant. Run.
Do they say anything about which amount of data? Because like 100 millions is kind of a small
Mm.
database, and still possibly without indexes, you don't get around it with full scans up.
Yeah, but of course they have indexes. But like, so I honestly don't know. So, but I think if you have to, if you're like, this is not a solution for everything, right? So, but I think it's a solution for maybe 80% of the cases. So if your case is like 20%, then you probably need to build your own resolvers, your own data warehouse. So this is for like the sort of the 80%.
Although you didn't delete,
Mm-hmm.
that's delete, how stable the backward compatibility was.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like if I would it actually gives like warnings when you do a deploy and you do breaking change on it. Then it actually says, sorry, you have data that like would get removed, or you actually first have to like specify how you want to deal with this data before I'm actually going to deploy this thing. That's actually pretty cool. So that you have this really nice, like easy to do it right, and when you do it wrong, you get an error. That's kind of like bit of success kind of thing. That's really the feeling I get with this. Like, do I really remember like exactly if I have entities of that type with that field? I don't remember, but this thing just tells me. Um, all right, so let me get back. So basically, this is my type definitions, and this is my configuration file, and I just have an endpoint and I have a secret, so that not everybody can just walk into my database, start changing things. Only my server knows the secret. I defined the data model, and then I also defined this seed thing, which is kind of handy. Like I just have this GraphQL queries. Actually, these are mutations. You see here a mutation, and these are just a bunch of things. And this is just the data I took from like my REST database that I had in the first presentation. I just took it and I just created like mutations out of it. So this one creates a technology entity, and here I created some events, and here I create speakers, and here I create videos. And then when I have this command line, I can just do Prisma seed. So with like now it's seeded. So if I would do Prisma Console on this thing, you would see that we go this one. You see that now there's all this data in here. And this is, I think, pretty handy. Like it's not like it's impossible to do another thing. It's actually pretty straightforward. But it's kind of neat if you work in teams and you just need to run one command and then you've bootstrapped your database. And if you just always run with Docker and you just always need to, like, you need a quick environment, that you just have like one step that just supplies with the right data, and then you get going. So that part that's a seeding. And if I go to the data, then you have like this issue that I showed earlier. Oh, is that because you have this server in the middle, you need to, and this exposes a GraphQL endpoint, and you need to query from your server to the thing, but queries are coming in here as well, and it's probably going to be like the same types, right? So like whatever you have in here, you probably also want to expose. You just don't want to expose everything. It's like a subset. So they have this handy thing called Prisma Binding, and basically it's like an SDK. So you have this Prisma Binding module, and you can just say like, okay, so these are my this is the type definitions that I have. This is the endpoint where it lives, my secret, and then I can just like start querying. In this case, just query for videos, and then for each video I want a name. So if I would run this here, see, if I just run it, then it just console logs the data. So like I have sort of like an SDK access to my database. So I don't have to actually write have to write post requests and like do like all kinds of things. So if I can just change it, and then you'll oh no, and then you see like the data is different, and this is like, it's just like a way to show like that you have this SDK. It's pretty handy. It offers much more. Like if I would go to this the website, the GitHub repo, you see that you can do queries, but you can mutations, and this all follows this because it follows this open CRUD standard. It was really, this Prisma bindings also have a very straightforward same kind of structure. But where it really shines is that you can now, if I would just comment out this stuff, and I would run this GraphQL server, basically I have this the same setup as earlier. I have my resolver, which is basically, I have here the yeah. That's another thing I first need to explain. You have like the type definitions of the server are of course not exactly the same as the one of your database, because you want to have a subset. So I have this definition of what I can do as a client with this server. And what I can do is I can just query for videos, because that's in my case the only thing I want to do. Probably when you have any kind of normal server, this would be a very long file with many things you can do and many different kind of extra types that you want to expose. But this query, if you would query for videos, I basically, the only thing I do here is I just access this SDK layer here, and I just pass, I query for videos, and I just pass along this info object that you get in each resolver in GraphQL. I didn't really like explain the info object, but the info object creates an entire abstract syntax tree of the query. So by passing it along to the Prisma service, the Prisma service knows exactly like which fields you're interested in. So what I did earlier here is that I had this like string here with which fields I'm interested in. That stuff, I don't need to pass that along. That will just be passed in the info object here. So actually I have this pretty small amount of work that I had to do in order to sort of expose the videos on via my server. So if I would run this now, I'm actually going to do it like this. So this is again this like graphical like interface, and you see now on the left actually I have two GraphQL endpoints. One is called app and one is database. Database is the one we saw earlier, right? So I can just do videos, and then I can do name, and I have that here. And but in app, if you go to the schema that is available, there are no like create user or whatever. All that stuff not available. The only thing I can query for is videos. But even though like I didn't like specify in my GraphQL schema like what's behind here, because I've defined that earlier already in the Prisma service, this one, it knows it sort of it sort of imports this into my server schema, and from that moment on I can traverse everything that's exposed by that is related to this video. So I can also have access to speakers and technologies and events. And that's, I think, really sweet, because that it just like saves so much time for me, because I can define once my data structure, that's my database, and then I can just define my entry point and in the server, and that's all I need to do, and I just relate it to the database, and that's all. Prisma does this merging for you of these two type schemas. So here I can just do again like video name. And also here you see it just works straight out of like what you would expect from it. So if I would like run this, it actually is already running, and then I would go to the client, and there it is. This actually now goes through my server that I'm running, and I've just completely rewrote my whole GraphQL implementation inside Prisma compared to my own implementation earlier that was based on like REST. Let's see. So that's basically like what Prisma is. So like you get this layer of GraphQL around your database, and it exposes all the kind of default stuff you want to do with your database. Open CRUD. And that makes sure that you don't have to write SQL. Maybe you need to at one point, but if you need to, you're probably not in that 80% of the use cases. You're probably in the 20% of use case where you talk about scale, where you have a lot of data, or you have just like 1,000 requests per second at peak moments. Maybe then you shouldn't like have the solution. But I personally think is that if you use this and you get to the point where you need to like rethink this part of the architecture, you then only need to rethink how you resolve your data. You don't have to rethink clients. You don't have to rethink the rest. The GraphQL server still serves the same schema. It still resolves everything in the same way. You can start swapping out parts of your of how it's resolved without affecting any of the clients, which is really powerful, right? Like the client doesn't know how the data is resolved. It just knows that sometimes it has to wait long and sometimes it's instant. And that's like really what I really like about Prisma, is that they just took like this very small thing. Like it's just a GraphQL layer around a database. And that's probably arguably not an easy thing, because indeed you need to make performance, you need to think about indexes, you need la la la. But it's still very small, and you can use it. And you can use it up to a certain point, and then you can just like walk away. There's no vendor lock-in. It's open source software. You can use their cloud hosting. You can do that if you want, but you don't need to. I don't know if it's production ready. I think it is. I think there's a bunch of like companies that are using it. But I would dare using this. I don't think it would crap out on you. Not in the beginning, at least. So that is sort of like a really short introduction to Prisma. Maybe it's a bit hard to wrap your head around. Yeah, that's it. If you have, yeah. You want to clap? Clap.